I just would like to welcome you again to another 2 hours of self-righteous, God-fearing pomposity here on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You got to put God-fearing in quotes as well. I don't know why. I guess some people are grammatically challenged, but got a lot going on this morning. We're going to talk a little bit, of course, about the changes in polling numbers, media bias. Also, we're going to be joined, I believe, by at least, I'm not sure who it'll be today, but we'll have a guest from Idaho State Police, I think, coming in, or it's, no. This is still October, isn't it? It'll be the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department, likely. And then Philip Haney, I believe is his name. He's going to be joining us. He's coming here to Twin Falls to talk a little bit about the threat, the growing Islamic threat and terrorism in the United States. He's on his. It's been rather quiet lately because if even these terrorists realize if they keep doing these terrible attacks in this country, that will help elect Donald Trump. And they don't want him because they know he'll stop them. They know Hillary Clinton, though, is actually going to be supportive of their efforts. So they've cooled it for a little while, but he's scheduled to join us to preview his visit here. He's got a couple of events in Twin Falls coming up this weekend. And then in the 9 o'clock hour, Clark Kaufman, of course, who's a state representative from the Filer area, and he's bringing some people from the Twin Falls County Fair with him. There is some discussion about building a new events center that would be for sports and entertainment complex in Twin Falls County or somewhere in the area. And it's still in the dream stage, if you will. But we wanted to talk a little bit about that and perhaps is there a need in this community to have something like that in order to bring in conventions and indoor rodeos and more shows? And will that help us out on the local level if we were to do that? What would it cost? How would it be paid for? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But meanwhile, story today that I happened to see it. I think it's called The Heat. It's a website that focuses on politics. Evan McMullin is now at double digits in new Idaho poll. Louise Mensch, the writer, says independent conservative Evan McMullin appears to be overtaking libertarian Gary Johnson as the third-party candidate in many states. However, he is now at 10%, I should point that out. But Donald Trump has a 38 percentage point lead. And Donald Trump has a 20-point lead over Hillary Clinton. Trump is below 50% now, but that's because 16% is going to either Gary Johnson or Evan McMullin. We wanted to share that. Rasmussen reports, or Rasmussen as it's often called, I guess that's how you pronounce it back in Denmark, polled 750 likely voters. Some people have been questioning me about my comments on polls this week, and I don't believe that all of the polls are inaccurate. Some may be, but not all of them. But I do want to remind you, Randy Staples made a great point while he was in studio with us yesterday when he said there are so few people with landlines anymore that polling data could be skewed. You got to think about that. Most of the people who still have landlines are the people who use checks, and they write a check at the checkout counter instead of using a debit card. In other words, they're older Americans. And older Americans, they've got their AARP cards, and that organization is just a front for the Democrat Party. So if you're polling a lot of those folks because they have landlines, you might be getting a higher number of people saying that they're voting for Democrats. In Wisconsin, there was a release of some figures from early voting. Now Wisconsin says it was accidental, but it actually shows Donald Trump with a huge lead in that very blue state. So we don't know. And then Fox News was reporting last night that in many of the polls, the lead for Hillary Clinton has narrowed because the media simply can't ignore any longer this WikiLeaks dump, where it looks very much like they were trying to cover up. President Obama denied that he knew anything about what was going on with their private server, and now it appears there's more details there. And was it Podesta, John Podesta, who's the Clinton family current consigliere, said something to the effect of, we have to clean this up. In other words, before our friends of the media get a sniff of this, we better get rid of it. Well, your friends of the media are still going to back you up. And we've talked this year about the incredible bias that we have seen in this campaign for the presidency. Now, most of us have realized over the years that this permeates most mainstream media all the way down to the local level, although it's a little less rigid when you reach your local levels, when you're talking about people in radio, television, and news reporting. And you do have, I think, more people who are trying to be fair in those situations. But at the national level, there's very little of that goes on any longer. And I shared with you yesterday a writer at a newspaper in Kalispell, Montana, one of the editors there, Frank Miele is his name. Turns out he knows one of my good friends here in Twin Falls. Frank Miele wrote a piece where he dissected an Associated Press report on a Trump campaign appearance. This was supposed to be news, but it was all opinion from the reporter trying to skew the story to make readers think that Donald Trump is a desperate man who's going to be leading us into civil war if he doesn't win this election. Today, a writer at the Los Angeles Times, one of the editors there, has a piece. I happen to see this at the very same source, Real Clear Politics, that I saw the Miele piece yesterday. The writer at the LA Times says, I don't like Donald Trump. I think he's dangerous. Our paper has not endorsed him, but I think the media's coverage of Donald Trump has gotten to the point where it's hurting the media's credibility. They're finally starting to realize this after only 50 years. Took that long? What is the learning, how steep is the learning curve over there? That's the question we have to ask. So we're seeing more and more of this. These people are not alone, though, in what they're talking about. Some of you may be familiar with a man who does a little work at Fox News by the name of Howard Kurtz. Now, Howard Kurtz ended up over at Fox because he got bounced from CNN. Howard Kurtz did an interview with me for his newspaper column about 15 years ago, where I talked to him about just how out of control the media already had become. And he said, I'll give you anonymity. I'll call you Jim instead of Bill. And I'll just call you Jim and nothing else. And he wrote the column. And he described roughly where I worked, which was a dead giveaway, especially among people in my own company who knew what my beef already was with the way we were doing things. So I kept getting these phone calls from people in the company saying, are you Jim? So I thought it's time to go look for a new job. And I went to a job interview in Vermont, and I'm talking to the general manager of the television station. He suddenly looks across the table and says, are you Jim? And unfortunately, it ended my television career prematurely, which was good for me because I enjoy what I do much more now. And I don't blame Howard Kurtz for it because he led me down this path. But Kurtz is speaking last night on the record on Fox with Brit Hume. And Hume is asking him, do you see bias in the coverage of this year's presidential race?
Let's get to this question of whether the media bias, which always cuts against Republicans in nearly every cycle that we can remember, has been noticeably worse in this cycle, in your judgment?
By light years, Britt. I mean, I have never seen in modern political history such an unrelenting avalanche of negative coverage of one major party presidential candidate. And Trump plays against that, of course, all the time by bashing us. Now, I do have to hastily add that some of the problems that Trump have had, particularly in the last couple of months, have been self-inflicted.
Right.
And also that other...
Well, it gets to this question. Trump is behind in the race, as even his own campaign manager has acknowledged. The Real Clear Politics average shows that. Our poll, which shows some gains for him, shows that as well. So the question arises, is the predicament in which he finds himself with these very high negatives, which she also has, Hillary Clinton also has, but though not as high as his, is the media coverage bad enough that it could be responsible for the situation he's in?
Not bad enough for me to say, well, the media are making him lose this race. Because, you know, every candidate, I mean, candidates going back to Ronald Reagan have managed to overcome a hostile press and win the White House. So I would say it hasn't helped him. And particularly lately, you have even some journalists, some media critics defending the outsized attention that Trump gets and the overwhelming negativity of the attention that he gets by saying, well, Trump is a different candidate. He's so dangerous that we have to suspend the usual standards. Well, I don't buy that. That's not journalism. That's advocacy.
Media Research Center sat down and actually had people assign them to watch all of the major network newscasts over the course of a month and decided to find out how much of the coverage was negative against Hillary Clinton versus negative against Donald Trump. 91% of the Trump coverage was negative. Hers was in the 70% range. However, a lot of times it was qualified, according to the people who were watching these newscasts, by saying, well, but Mrs. Clinton, of course, they're always looking for a reason to excuse her bad behavior. And it looks as if what she did with that private email server, Richard Nixon got in trouble for a lot less. They were obstructing justice, friends. And media doesn't want to delve into that because obviously she's the one they want to drag across the finish line. She's the fellow traveler. And she will ensure that media folks can get married to horses, cows, and pigs, which they think is far more important than, let's say, reducing the $20 trillion in debt that this country has that is killing us. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. and newsradio1310.com. I had an interesting question from someone on my Facebook page this morning. Will there be war after this election? That is, civil war. I think so. I looked at that projected electoral map last night on television. Blue on one coast, blue on the other coast, a patch of blue in the southwest, and a patch of blue in the Great Lakes, and everything in between is red. I don't think we can live with those people any longer, and I think that's the direction we're headed, no matter who wins this election come 12 days from now. William Fortune, who's a professor of history and a Civil War buff, that's his concentration. For full disclosure, some years ago, Newt Gingrich personally gave me a copy of a novel that he and Fortune wrote about. They wrote it together about how the world would be different if the United States government had lost the Civil War, and they projected what the future would have looked like. Mr. Fortune was appearing on a show with the televangelist Jim Bakker, and had this to say about the direction the country is going.
I'm a Civil War historian. 1860 is the closest I can parallel this to, and we all know what the price was when we went to a Civil War that killed 660,000 young men because we became so divided.
Wow.
That's the nearest I can parallel this to. Second, Pastor, you have the Constitution on your table right there. Read the Constitution.
Wow.
Particularly read Article 1. Read how the government is formed, the Congress, Section 7, 8, and 9. Taxation, almost everything derives from there. And then point 3, vote. Now, I'm going to look straight at the camera, and those of you who feel I can't quite pull the level for this person or that person, and remember, you're just voting for the electors, which we might talk about, you got to vote for your senators. 1/3 of all senators up. You vote for every member of the House of Representatives. If you're worried about the Supreme Court afterwards, remember, advice and consent to the Senate. Vote, vote, vote. Even if you're not going to vote in the presidential election, vote for your senators, your state reps, and your House of Representatives. And I do believe we are at 1860. We are that close to the edge of the debacle.
You have a lot of lefties out there who, of course, they listen as a guilty pleasure to this program, wouldn't admit it to anyone. They will be poo-pooing that interview because it was on Jim Bakker's show, and Mr. Bakker, of course, had some troubles in his own life many, many years ago, going back into the late 1980s. But he did his time, and he asked the Lord for forgiveness. The lefties don't know what that's all about. And he turned his life around and is now back on the straight and narrow path. So I don't have a problem with that. Plus, it's not him talking, it's his guest talking. And you have to look at the guest and realize that the guest is an expert in this area, and when he makes that comparison, that's something to be concerned about. Here's the thing. Would such an event actually in the long run be good for the country? I want to talk about that if we get a chance at some point this morning. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's, well, call it 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Gotta love this music. It always reminds me of what? Bonnie and Clyde. They go speeding down the road, which was later spoofed by Monty Python, where a bunch of sheep were riding around in an old car, robbing banks with Tommy guns. We've got to take a quick note here of a friend of our show, and that is Dr. Eric F. Jones. He's going to be joining us, I would assume, after Election Day. I'd hope to schedule him in October, but we've gotten so big with the political stuff lately that it's tough to squeeze people in, so we'll be talking with him again on air sometime soon because he has an approach to medicine and wellness. Say it's just wellness, your overall well-being, and that's a systemic approach. He's been doing this since 1993. He has degrees in both, master's degrees and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy. Dr. Jones uses methods of alternative healing such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual cognitive self-regulation, and napathy. These help with mental, emotional, and physical and spiritual challenges. He's currently accepting new patients with evening and Saturday appointments available, 731-7178. And Dr. Jones is on Facebook. Eric F. Jones, Ph.D., mental health and wellness therapist, and that's Eric with a C. I've got a caller with us. We're going to call it 8:25 now on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Caller, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Bill, our side can win if Trump and others point out that while many hundreds of black youth didn't have jobs, Obama invited illegals to enter our country and gave them the welcome mat by giving them work permits. At age 15, once these illegals learn a trade or are trained for a job, they can be there for 50 years till Social Security. Obama cheated many black American youths out of 50 years of wages.
Hey, thank you for the call. And I just read yesterday that 7% of all the babies born in the United States last year were the children of illegal immigrants. And if you try to send them back, Democrats will scream, you can't tear families apart. Who's paying for the needs of all of those children? Yes, an illegal immigrant may not be able to go down to your social service office and get on the WIC program or all of these other programs, but if the children are born here, they can sign up for the kids. And your local Democrat ward boss doesn't tell you that that's costing you a lot of money. Oh, I'm for the little guy, as long as, of course, it's not you. That's what they actually mean. I got a couple of things to share here. This is going around the internet. People are talking about Michael Moore endorsing Donald Trump. The problem is this video has been truncated. He's not actually doing that. I had to heavily edit it this morning because Michael Moore has a bit of a potty mouth. It sounds, though, if you listen to this 60 seconds of it, like he's actually giving Trump an endorsement.
Because I know a lot of people in Michigan that are planning to vote for Trump, and they don't necessarily like him that much, and they don't necessarily agree with him. They're not racist and rednecks, they're actually pretty decent people. And so I wanted to sort of, after talking to a number of them, I wanted to write this. And Donald Trump came to the Detroit Economic Club and stood there in front of the Ford Motor executives and said, if you close these factories as you're planning to do in Detroit and build them in Mexico, I'm going to put a 35% tariff on those cars when you send them back, and nobody's going to buy them. It was an amazing thing to see. No politician, Republican or Democrat, had ever said anything like that to these executives.
As Michael Moore speaking, he has a new, what he's done, I think it's called Trumpland. He put it together hastily, but it's a new documentary about Trump's movement, and he seems to like Trump voters. So a lot of people are saying, well, he's endorsing Donald Trump. That's not actually true, because at the very end of this, he makes a pitch for Hillary Clinton by saying a lot of people are going to be so angry this is their way to give the middle finger to the establishment. And he says it'll feel good for a day, but when it's over with, then things will be a lot worse if you elect Donald Trump. The thing is, people have edited this like I did. It makes it sound like he is giving an endorsement to Trump. Now, the reason I edited it, because after this, the remarks just went downhill, and we can't use those words on radio. So we're not going to be sharing that. I've got to tell you, with 12 days to go and there's some movement in the polls, this has been such an unusual election year that we could be well looking. If Donald Trump pulls this off, it'll be the most incredible and amazing comeback in American political history. Now, that's not being political. That's not making even an endorsement. It's telling you that if he does it, and that will be a subjective point. It will not be just my opinion, if you will. Objective. Is that the word I'm looking for? Yes. Okay. I'm telling you, with everything that's been thrown at him and the fact that he's still standing and within a few points tells you that the American public is not ready to buy into the Hillary Clinton bandwagon, and that we could yet see a major surprise come Election Day on November 8th. Again, 12 days away. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're down to 47 at 8:30. Want to mention Dan Thomas here from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. He's going to warm things up in just a few minutes. That's on the way.